Hi guys, as many of you know, I've got quite a few ant colonies, one of them being this 15 queen Formica fusca colony. They're the colony I've had the longest, so I felt they deserved a natural terrarium. In this video, you'll see how I made this awesome terrarium for them, and how I moved them in. So, let's get going. These girls have been needing a rehouse for a while now, not because they've outgrown their current one, but because it doesn't suit their needs particularly well. So, to try and recreate their natural environment, I'll be using this aquarium here. It measures 36 centimeters wide, 28 centimeters high, and 22 centimeters deep, and this equates to a volume of 22 litres. Unfortunately, it has a crack running down the back, but this doesn't affect it too much for my use. Anyway, let's not hesitate, and let's make these girls a brand new home. As usual, the first thing I did was create a drainage layer. Due to the tank's large size, I'm using Leaker as I have a lot of it, and it takes up a lot of space. The drainage layer isn't vital for this colony, as humidity won't be very high, but it does help springtails and other microbiota thrive. I added Leaker until I had a layer around 1 pellet thick. Separating the drainage layer from the substrate is very important, as if the two were allowed to mix, then it would be rendered useless, and your substrate could become waterlogged, which could harm inhabitants. I'm using geotextile fabric, but any material that allows water to pass through could probably be used. I roughly cut it to size and then placed the tank on it and trimmed around the edges until it was just slightly larger than the area of the base. Now, when added, the excess fabric will fold up and create a bowl, keeping the substrate separate, better than if it were the exact same size. Once I had added it, it was time to move on to the substrate. I'm using the same custom mix that I use in all my terrariums, and I go through the ingredients in this video here. I powered the substrate in using a container. I kept adding it until I had a substantial amount. I shifted it with much more towards the back. This creates a good sense of depth and makes the terrarium seem larger than it is, and has the added benefit of increasing the volume of soil the ants can dig in. For this build, I wanted to use grapevine wood. It has great details and looks great no matter how you use it. I also wanted to use little to no rock, as the area I caught this colony was very wooded with lots of decaying matter and few rocks. I added more soil as needed to secure the wood. I'm going for quite a plateaued look, so that the ants have lots of soil to dig in and a dedicated foreground where I can feed them. Some of you may have noticed that last week's terrarium has a similar style to this one, and in truth it does. I wanted to test this idea on a smaller scale before I committed to it here, and I'm a big fan of how it turns out, so stick around for that. I added a smaller piece of wood to fill the lower left side and add a less steep path down. Like last week's video, I plastered the sides with sphagnum moss to add support. At this point, you can really see the idea I have start coming together. So of course, the next logical step was to add plants. I'm using plants I know will do well in a terrarium, as once the ants are in, it'll be difficult to add new ones, or remove dead ones. I placed them in first in their pots to get a sense of which plants I wanted to use, and where I wanted to position them. I'll cover the moss later on with more moss. Off camera, I remove the soil off the roots and clean them up a bit. I'm not sure of the exact species of plants, but I think that they're all peperomias. When I choose plants for escape, I don't have anything particular in mind. I just go and pick plants that I think will look good. If I end up not using some, then I save them for future projects. I ended up adjusting the layout of the plants slightly, and I think the purplish peperomia should add a great central focal point here. I also added another piece of wood to the centre right, as I felt there was a void that needed filling. This piece also allowed me to add more height by pointing it upwards. To cover the unsightly sphagnum moss, I'll be using pillow moss. I wasn't liking how much of it there was, so I added a small shoot of ivy, which should add more variation to the space. I also decided that the area under the wood shouldn't have moss on it, so I pulled off the sphagnum moss and scattered it around the foreground. This might look messy now, but by the time I'm finished, it still looks messy, but more natural, and I can imagine the ants making the entrance to their nest here, but knowing them, they probably won't. Now, to truly make this look natural and bioactive, I'm using oak leaf litter. I took leaves and broke much of the larger ones up and carelessly scattered them around. I find that doing it this way looks more natural instead of carefully placing them individually. Nature is random in the end, although I do adjust some if they look out of place. These Formica ants are really quite shy, and hopefully by adding lots of leaf litter and places to hide, it will make them feel more confident in the open as they can quickly get to safety. I added orchid bark in the foreground to soften the transition into the leaves, and it will have another added benefit like the leaves. The leaves will break down fairly quickly, releasing nutrients, and the bark will also break down, but it should take much longer and help keep the ecosystem stable. I added outer cones to add more details and to also break down over time, and give the cleanup crew more food sources. I sprayed down the whole build to flatten the leaves and help things settle in. Now, no bioactive setup is complete without a cleanup crew. I added various isopods, dairy cows, crystal whites, and tropical orange isopods. These will eat the ants' waste and any rotting matter, enriching the soils. Some were added by hand, whilst others times I simply hit the cork bark they were on the side of the terrarium, causing them to fall in. This process also added a lot of springtails, which are fantastic at consuming decaying matter. I let the cleanup crew settle in before moving on to adding the ants. However, before this, I needed to prepare the tank for the ants. This was escape-proofing it, so I added a layer of Fluon, also known as PTFE. It's super slippery for the ants, and they can't cross it. This is quite an important step, as I don't really want the ants escaping. I applied it liberally and let it dry fully before moving on. Now to add the colony. They're currently housed in this all-in-one white-tongue nest, so I decided that the best way to add them would be to block off the entrances with cotton wool, and then remove all the sand. I removed most of it with a spoon, then when I was sure there were no ants in it, I vacuumed the rest up. Originally, I was planning on attaching a vinyl tube and leading it into the aquarium. However, very quickly, I realised these ants were much too shy to explore this way, and so I added a piece of vinyl tubing that I had covered in black electrical tape to provide the ants with only one hideout, and I left them like this for a few hours until all the ants were inside. I placed the tube into the terrarium and left them to it. Unfortunately, at this time, I had to go out, so I couldn't film the ants moving in. Although knowing this species, they probably didn't make much of a show. Anyway, with them all moved in, I left them for a few days to acclimatise to this new space. I'm done with all the details I want to add, but I've got a few things I would like to mention. I ended up removing a lot of the leaf litter because I felt it was too cluttered and it was difficult to see in the foreground. It's about time I move this terrarium into the space I have planned. This IKEA shelving fits the tank perfectly, so let's add it. I want to light this tank as well, but these ants don't really like bright light, so I'm using 2 of these LED lights, which I'll link below. They stick on and have a few different colour settings. The 2 I'll be using most are the cool white and red, as ants can't see red light, so it'll be ideal for observing them without disturbing them. Seeing as this colony has been with me for so long, I think it's appropriate that we give them and their new home a name. So let me know what you think they should be called down in the comments below. Anyway, let me know if you like it, and if you've stayed this long, here's a sneak peek at an upcoming video, so consider subscribing to see that. It should be awesome. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel. So, see you guys all next week.